This man stepped on this floating slab of ice deep in the Pacific Ocean with a mission. He and his filming companion planned to shoot a thrilling adventure documentary about ocean inhabitants. But he got much more than he bargained for when this orca popped up, because the giant sea mammal did something totally unexpected. Ben was looking forward to this day on the ocean. He and his filming buddy George rented a boat and set out to sea with a broad smile. They would capture nature's most beautiful aquatic creatures on camera and use the footage in their documentary. But this episode was about to get a shocking twist. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The two men arrived at their first stop of the day, a floating piece of ice mass in the middle of the ocean. Ben exited the boat and climbed on the ice while George readied his camera. It was thrilling for both of them since they were new at this, so results weren't guaranteed. But the two friends were about to get a huge surprise. Ben took a seat on the icy rock and spoke about the aquatic creatures in this area, mostly talking about the orca sightings. Then George spotted something. George filmed from his boat, which was about 20 feet away from where Ben was sitting. There was movement in the water near Ben's feet. It started slowly, but that didn't last long. Ben had no clue of what was going on beneath his feet, and even George was not initially dialed in on the occurrence below the water's surface. But when the curious cameraman finally noticed the water moving and warned his friend, it was already too late. Ben, look out below. Before Ben could react, a giant 7,000-pound orca burst out of the water. Ben was in shock, so much so that he even forgot how to speak in full sentences. The man just shouted and mumbled random words. The footage was priceless, and George knew this, so he kept the camera rolling the entire time. After the initial shot of adrenaline calmed down a bit, Ben tried to move as slowly as possible so he wouldn't spook the orca, not knowing that the animal would soon cause massive panic. The large orca became restless out of nowhere and dove under the water's surface multiple times, reappearing just moments later again and again. And every time she did, the orca would pound her massive body against the floating piece of ice. Her approach appeared aggressive, and it made Ben lose his balance. What's happening? George watched in horror as he witnessed the situation from their boat. Ben, on the other hand, was less lucky. Every time he tried to get up, the orca would slam the ground beneath him, making him lose footing. With George chanting him on from the boat, Ben panicked, got up, and ran across the icy bridge. He thought he was going to make it, but the large aquatic animal had other plans. Just 5 feet before Ben could reach the outstretched arms of his friend, the orca cut him off. The animal pounded the ice with full force, breaking the ice path in half and severing its connection with the boat. Ben nervously crawled along the edges of his floating ice ridge, looking for any sign of the animal. The only way he could save his life was if George would hover the boat closer so he could make the jump. It was the sound water made when something large moved through it with high speed, creating a negative pressure beneath the surface. Normally, this would occur when heavy boats move through the water. But both Ben and George knew what caused this pressure vortex. It was the orca that hunted them. The large animal moved beneath the ice bridge with high speed and was about to show its head again for her final acts. George shouted for Ben to jump, but before he had the chance to, the animal pounded to ice beneath Ben's feet, launching him into the water as a result. George shouted in horror as he witnessed his best friend disappear beneath the ice-cold water's surface. But George fell to his knees and started crying, thinking he'd lost his friend forever. Everyone knows that these kinds of whales could be extremely dangerous, so seeing a friendly one up close was too good to be true. While George searched from his position above water, an entirely different struggle was going on beneath the surface. The pressure vortex created by the orca was sucking Ben down deeper and deeper without him being able to resist. When the water pressure finally neutralized, Ben was already well over 50 feet deep. He could feel the intense pressure building on his eardrums, but that was not his biggest worry because, in the distance, Ben saw that the giant orca had turned around and was swimming straight toward him. Ben frantically moved his feet, trying to reach the water's surface in time. But the orca was simply too fast, and Ben realized that. While Ben counted down the moments before impact with the large orca, George was still searching from the safety of his boat. There was some development in the water since many bubbles had come up over the last few seconds. There was clearly a lot of movement going on down there, and then the unthinkable happened. Out of nowhere, where Ben's head popped up above the water, making George fall backward out of initial fright. George's best friend was gasping for air as he reached for the boat. "Are you all right, man?" George spoke as he reached out his hand to help. What did it do? Ben was lifted out of the water, and even though he was still catching most of his breath, he could speak. He said he was fine and told George that even though it seemed that the orca was trying to attack him, it did something else. Something much stranger. What did it do? George asked. Ben smiled, mostly because he was glad to still be alive, but also because he was smart enough to wear a waterproof body camera for this documentary. He unbuckled the device from his torso and rewound the tape to the moment of his plummet into the water. The two men were glued to the screen, and after a hazy first minute of Ben struggling to fight the water pressure, the footage stabilized. And then the Orca appeared on screen. It swam toward Ben at high speed, but then, right before the Orca reached Ben, it made an insanely sharp U-turn and regathered some distance. From her new position, the Orca started making bizarre flips underwater. But the two men did not realize that the Orca that fascinated and scared them both was closer than they thought. As Ben and George gazed at the monitor in their hands, the Orca suddenly jumped out of the water before them. It flapped its fin and gave the same unnatural screech. Yet at that moment, something clicked in Ben's mind. Was this creature trying to tell them something? Was it persuading them to follow her? Ben made his thoughts clear to George, and even though he was hesitant, they still decided it was worth checking out. The two men sailed up to the location of the Orca in the water. After about 10 minutes, the Orca reached her destination, and what they found there shocked them. "Something is floating in the water," Ben shouted. The two men raised the boat's power and sailed past the Orca for the first time. "There is someone in the water, hanging on for dear life," George said to his friend frantically. The two men wasted no time and rushed over to the location of the hands and started pulling. Moments later, a weak but alive man surfaced. Ben and George pulled harder and eventually lifted the man onto the dry sanctuary of their boat. Ben grabbed a blanket from an emergency kit they had on board and started rubbing the man's back for warmth. "What happened to you, George?" asked the poor man. The man looked up and started to explain. He said his name was Lucas Finley, and he was part of a research team that studied climate change and its effects on ice mass in these parts of the Pacific. Their boat was hit by the one thing they were investigating, the one thing they tried to prevent. Because of global warming, the larger ice mass melted, and a large piece broke off while their ship was sailing beneath it. The impact was so heavy that it broke their ship clean in half, making it sink almost instantly. Lucas stated that he just managed to save himself during the commotion. He was able to hold on to that floating metal part, but his friends and colleagues were most likely lost. The man was heartbroken. "These people are not just your everyday colleagues. We just spent almost 4 years of our lives together, collecting data and doing everything as a team. We eat together, we sleep together, and now they're all gone." Instead, Lucas put his hands to his face and cried. There was a third act to this story, and a helpful Orca led them straight to it. George got behind the wheel and eagerly followed the large sea creature. The last time they trusted her, they found Lucas. So who knows what she will conjure this time? After a short trip, they managed to turn the corner and make it to the other side of the mass. That's when they found it. George saw it first, and even though he had a rough idea of what he saw, he needed the distressed scientist's opinion to prove it. He placed his hand on the man's shoulder and pointed toward a gap in the ice mass. Lucas looked up and started to scream instantly. Oh my God! His 4 co-workers and friends were all still alive, and they were residing in a tall but narrow crack within the ice mass. "Wonders have not left this world," the man shouted happily. They were all alive and well. The waves that arose after the crash drifted them to the other side of the ice mass. The Orca was the hero of the day. She witnessed these stressed people and set out to find help. After all the people were on board, they sailed to shore, where the scientists got proper medical treatment. 6 months later, Ben and George's documentary dropped. George's camera managed to capture almost every part of that day, and the footage was a testament to the beauty of the sea, with the Orca, who they called B, at the heart of it. It's a place we need to protect at any cost.